Watch more programs like this on cable and stream with PCN Select. Subscribe at PCNTV.com.
Well, welcome everyone to PCN's coverage of the 2022 general election. We are at Duquesne University for a special college election panel. I'm Phil Beckman. I'll be moderating for this episode. Joining me on the panel are Ryan Deto, a reporter with the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review. Rob Gleason is a former Pennsylvania GOP chair. Nancy Patton Mills is a former Democratic Party chair. And Louis Irwin is a professor at Duquesne University in political science. Now, Lou, we are about 2 months out from our election day on November 8th. And how does this year's general election compare to general elections that you've seen in the past?
Well, thanks, Phil, and welcome everybody to Duquesne University. We're thrilled to have you here with us today. So I think one of the things that jumps out at me as we look at the midterm elections in 2020 is how unpredictable politics has become. And so there are really two ways that these elections could go, and they're all dependent upon the turnout that each of the political parties is going to be able to generate within their respective bases, and how they're going to be able to dampen enthusiasm on the other side of the aisle. So I think it wasn't long ago that Ryan and I had a conversation back around the time that the draft Dobbs decision or opinion was leaked, that I made the spectacularly wrong prediction that, well, I don't think Dobbs in this climate is going to have that much of an impact on what we see happen in the fall. And so the point I make here is that that was completely wrong, right? And we have seen dramatic differentials in red states like Kansas, where this particular issue has motivated voters, especially female voters, women voters, to get out and to push back against that decision. The point is that we have 9 weeks until the election, and it's not clear whether or not we're going to see some other emergent issue that might swing those sets of issues, the support for those issues, to one party or the other. So this, Phil, you were looking for an answer here, a clear-cut one, but the bottom line is, I think we're too close. This is still too close to call, and we've got a lot of life to live between now and early November.
Rob, you've been around Pennsylvania politics for quite a few years. How does this fall's general election compare to others that you've seen?
I think it's, I've seen so many elections, I'm never surprised. I was saying to Nancy today, they're all kind of the same to me. The polls in the summer they're not important. Somebody's up by 10, down by 5. It really doesn't matter until we get a lot closer. The difference that has developed over the years is these attack ads that people are doing more and more of them, and you can see all these candidates now are attacking everybody back and forth. You really don't even know what anybody stands for. They're saying what the other guy stands for, and so nobody really knows. I think that'll probably shift as we get into October. Then the candidates are going to have to start stating their own positions. If we have debates, a lot of times they will have to do that, because the moderators, press people that are nonpartisan, will want the candidates to expound on how they feel about issues, and I'm sure you care about issues. I think the biggest thing in this election is who's going to control the federal government and who's going to control the state government. Is it going to be the Republicans? Are the Democrats going to continue, or the Republicans are going to be able to take over the House and the Senate and slow down the Biden administration? But we face this over and over again as we move forward. There's just a lot more partisanship now, as you young people maybe can tell. You probably don't remember the old days. When the election was over, everybody came together and worked for the good of the community or for the state or for the nation. That isn't anymore. People continue to fight for the next election. So it's changed. Politics has changed. But as was just earlier mentioned, it's about getting out the vote. That's the most important thing.
Nancy, Rob says nothing surprises him anymore. How about you? Are you surprised by anything?
I am a little bit surprised. I think this cycle is one of the most interesting cycles that we've ever had. When you think about the fact that the governor's race, for instance, would have been swung automatically to the Republicans after a two-term Democrat. And that, of course, is not the situation now. there's a very strong possibility that it will flip, and this would be an unusual time for that. I also think it's interesting that in the senatorial race, that the argument is whether you live in Pennsylvania or not. And I don't know how that's going to change or how that's going to evolve as we go into the fall. It's going to be very interesting to see if Dr. Oz, I think he's going to have to drop the doctor at some point, but Mehmet Oz is going to have to explain his connection and his affiliations here in Pennsylvania. So this is interesting. And of course, he's running against someone who is an incumbent lieutenant governor. So you would think that at this time in politics that the Governor Wolf and Lieutenant Governor Fetterman would be moving on into another direction. But to see Fetterman now leading the ticket, and I understand what you're saying, it's very early to be looking at polls, and it's dangerous if you're a leader, a political leader, very dangerous to look at polls and think that you're ahead whenever it is early September. But I think it's very interesting. I think we have very colorful characters running for office. I think people are going to be more entertained by the ads than ever before. I think they're going to pay attention to the ads, whereas they just would normally just fall off the grid. I think people are going to want to see Dr. Oz or Mehmet Oz and see what he says, see how, and I see he's starting to transition a little bit, he's starting to change a little bit, and nuance his message a little bit to maybe bring women into his campaign. But I think that it's going to be fun to watch, and I think that Fetterman is a character unto himself. He and I are, I must say, close friends now. At one time, the last time I saw him was in Somerset in a snowstorm, and it was a late snowstorm in May, and he had on shorts, and he tried to explain to me why he had on shorts in a snowstorm. So when you have Dr. Oz and Lieutenant Governor Fetterman, and then I haven't even mentioned the governor's race. We'll get into that later, but that certainly is also very entertaining.
Ryan, as a reporter who's covering these campaigns, what types of trends are you seeing?
Well, really, I'm agreeing with what everyone else has said so far. That there's definitely a shift from Oz to really try to, I guess, moderate a little bit or try to appeal to maybe a broader, section of voters than he did during the primary, which was really a bloodbath between, the Republicans to try to win that nomination, and he barely did. It was very tight what he was able to win. And at his last event here in Monroeville, he was talking about his immigrant background a little bit more. He was really boosting the fact that his family kind of lived the American dream, which was something that we haven't really heard, especially in the primary before. So he's really trying to shift that and really hitting Fetterman really hard on crime. And I think crime has probably become a little bit bigger of an issue this year because, well, there has been rise in crime. There's been a noticeable, very large rise in crime in Philadelphia, and there's been a really big rise in crime in Pittsburgh, too. It doesn't get as much attention. We're not really the boogeyman of the state that, Republicans usually go after. But those issues have really taken over that. For the governor's race, it's been mostly kind of dominated by Shapiro. He's got like way more money than Mastriano has, like $13 million or something like that compared to Mastriano's got pennies really. And so it's just really kind of been dominated by Shapiro's narrative. And Mastriano doesn't really play nice with the press at all. And I think that is kind of hurting him in terms of just defining his own narrative. And he's got a pretty compelling narrative too, but he just hasn't really put it out there yet.
Well, I think it's interesting that each side has one candidate who won't talk to the press. Lieutenant Governor Fetterman will not talk to the press. He said he won't debate. We all know that sadly he had a medical, physical problem, and he has to deal with this, but he is not doing interviews, he's not going to debate. And Mastriano, he will not deal with the press, and I don't think he wants to debate either. So it's kind of strange that there's one on each side. But you know what? At the end of the day, what candidates do, they do what is going to be in their best interest. And so if they don't think they're a good debater or they have some kind of problem, then they're going to duck the debates. They're not going to do it. One thing that I think that is really different this year, this could be controversial, but I don't think a lot of people don't care who the candidates are. We have major issues in this country right now. Inflation is a major issue. Gas prices is a major issue. Crime is a major issue. Immigration is a major issue. So what you've been reading and hearing is that the Democrats are in charge now, and it's always the party in charge that gets the blame. That's just the way it is. It's the old deal is if the Steelers are having a bad year, you don't fire the team, you fire the coach. So here we are. The coach here is the President of the United States. He's in charge, whether it's his fault or not, that gasoline is at 4 something a gallon and butter's $5 a pound and crime's running rapid in the cities. Whether it's his fault or not, a lot of times the voters are going to blame him, and they don't care who the candidate is. They'll vote for a Republican. And I think that's what we're kind of counting on is going to happen in Pennsylvania, is a lot of people are just looking at these issues, these pocketbook issues. It's always about the economy, and they're just going to vote for the Republican candidates.
I would just to pick up on a point that we talked about a little earlier, is that I think normally that is true, that those pocketbook issues and that reaction after whoever's in power. I would also joke that I think, if we are talking about the Steelers coach, if we could actually vote, Pittsburghers would probably chuck their coach out after every 2 games or something like that. They get so mad. The overturning of Roe v. Wade and, the Dobbs decision really just has totally catalyzed a different set of voters. And I looked at the voter registration numbers here in Pennsylvania, and there was a notable shift. Republicans were dominating in terms of voter registration in 2021 and at the start of 2022, and they had narrowed the gap so significantly. But then the Dobbs decision, and it just flipped.
Right, and women are registering in great numbers. And we don't know if they're all Democratic women. We don't know if they're Republican women. But we know that women are coming out, and they will be a voting bloc in this election.
And a lot more young women, too, you know?
And something you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, about whether people vote for the candidate. I think in Pennsylvania they do, more than in other areas. Whenever we had an incumbent president and Donald Trump running in a state that he had won, the people voted for Joe Biden, and I think because he was from Pennsylvania, he was a person that people knew. I would go into a room, if there were 10 people in the room, 8 people already knew Joe Biden. So I think that the people do vote for the person. We saw in the primary, when Connor Lamb ran against John Fetterman, that people voted for John Fetterman. They knew him. He had been to all 67 counties. I counted 4 times, maybe more. And so people personally, if they know the candidate, they're going to vote for him. And I understand the economic issues, and I understand the large policy issues that weigh in. But Pennsylvania has also been, under my leadership, I know that we did not nationalize our elections in Pennsylvania. Whenever Governor Wolf won and Senator Casey by landslides, they won because they talked about issues that meant something to Pennsylvanians. They did not look. The voters did not look to the national image. I know that the Trump White House talked about the wall in Mexico. And I was on debates with another Republican chair who talked about the wall. I said, I think we're talking about education, and I think we're talking about jobs and health care in Pennsylvania. So I do think that Pennsylvanians vote for the candidate. And it's going to be interesting to see how these candidates change their message, or stick to their message, or so we'll watch it. We'll watch the watch the ads and see how things
You know,
evolve.
in every election, there are single-issue voters. There's no question about that.
Well, that's true.
People that Dobbs will be the reason that they vote, but when you have an issue like the economy that brushes everybody, it's a powerful issue. And you said how after Dobbs, the registrations have picked up. But as you know, we've picked up almost 900,000 registrations over the past few years, so they're not going to get anywhere near that. And the other thing is that you know, as you rank the issues, and you've seen these rankings, Dobbs is like fourth or fifth with
And climbing
people.
though right now. Climbing right now, but yeah, you're
It's
right.
climbing, but it's way down there
Economy is
because you know
definitely-
what? Every time I go and fill up my gas tank, it reminds me.
If I could add
ahead.
a couple of, as the panel's political scientist, I'm going to throw out some empirical evidence that bears on some of the things that these panelists are talking about. First off, this issue of registration. So first off, what we do know as we look at patterns of registration by party across all of the places in the United States that do registration by party. Some states do not do that, right? But since the Dobbs, the pre-decision was leaked, we have seen across the country a net gain of 16% in Kansas alone. So when you look at Kansas, prior to the leaking of the Dobbs decision beforehand, if you looked at 100 new voters registering in Kansas, about half would be men and about half would be women. Once that pre-decision or that leaked pre-decision was out there, all of a sudden, Democrats had realized a 16%, or excuse me, women realized a 16% advantage compared to men in new registrations. And I point out that this was before Kansas actually had a ballot referendum that was introduced by the Republicans that control that red state, right, with the goal of clearing the way to put limits on abortion rights. And this was a shockwave across the United States when that referendum failed dramatically. And it wasn't just new Democratic women registering to vote who made that difference, right? But a couple of other points in this. When we look at all registrations across the country since Dobbs, in the places where we can differentiate where that you register to a party, Democrats, and again, we don't know how all of these folks feel about the Dobbs decision, if that's the motivator for them or not. But what we do know is that since then, of all of the new registrations across the United States in those states, 55% of those registrants have registered to the Democratic Party. 45% are to the Republican Party. I'll also point out another important indicator here. There were 9 special elections for the U.S. House of Representatives held before the whole Dobbs issue came out. If you average all of the results of those elections compared against the partisan lean, so where it would have normally gone if it's kind of a neutral election, the Republicans outperformed Democrats in those 9 elections by an average of 2 points. Since Dobbs, there have been 4 elections, 2 of which have been, and we're not even talking about Alaska, that's not counted in this because they have ranked choice voting and that's a little bit gidgy on that one. But since then, Democrats have outperformed their partisan lean by 9 points in those 4 special elections that have occurred since then. So this is, I'm not really disputing anything that any of the panelists are saying here. Because again, 9 weeks in politics is a lifetime. Past performance does not guarantee future results, right? So we also have, one last point, we also have what some of my students have heard me talk about, the Trump effect in polling. Polling, every time the former president is a candidate for office, our polls are kablooey, right? And we won't get into the reasons for all of that we speculate are causing that here, but we just can't trust those polls, right? In 2018, the former president wasn't on the ballot, but he created the energy behind a Democratic sweep in 2018. And what we're seeing right now is the former president make himself, where ordinarily there would be a penalty, as Rob pointed out, there would be kind of a presidential penalty to the party that's in charge, right? We've seen that almost every modern election, with two exceptions, right? In '98 and in 2002, and there were specific reasons why those were outliers and favored the incumbent president's party. But the truth is, whereas this could have been a referendum on President Biden's performance and the performance of the Democrats, the former president is working very hard to make this a referendum on him. And I can't imagine, Rob can speak I'm not speaking here as a partisan, I'm speaking here as a scientist. Rob can speak for the Republicans, but I can't imagine that they're too keen on this when you look at how balanced we are, and how difficult, or how just a little bit of a swing among some of those voters that could go either way could end up swinging control of the House or the Senate to the Democrats, rather than where everyone in the spring thought they were going to go, which was to the Republican Party.
Lou,
I just would like
Go ahead.
a counterpoint to you. So the Dobbs is new, it's fresh, it just happened. People were energized when that happened. Kansas was right after that. The people rushed out. The pro-life faction of the Republican Party has been around forever. They're single-issue voters. They work day and night on this. They are there all the time. They're very powerful. We don't hear about them now because they've been delivering year after year for 45 years. So, this is something new. I have a niece who is 28 years old, and she complained bitterly to me after the Dobbs, and then she just was home this weekend, and she bitterly complained about the cost of gas that she had to drive from Philadelphia, and the cost of food and things like that. So, at the end of the day, that's why I say the pocketbook issues will trump everything else when it comes to this. But I don't dispute your numbers. It's something that has energized. We don't know, though, is it always just going to energize people for the Democrats?
Well, you mentioned that economy hits everybody, every family.
Everybody, every family.
So do women's rights, because every household has a woman in the house, and women's rights, I think, are on the ballot. And after 50 years, to take rights away from more than half of the population, I think will definitely be an issue. I don't think it was just a flash in the pan after the Dobbs decision. I think that it is still there, and I'm sure that your niece is concerned about the price of gas, but I'm sure she's also concerned about her own choices in life.
But how about the 50 years after Roe versus Wade? All the people that were pro-life who had to put up with this for all these years and fought back. We never talk about that. The Roe versus Wade decision.
Well, your base of 33%, I don't think is going to be enough.
You know what? I mean,
election.
there's nobody ever talks about the people who felt wronged whenever Roe versus Wade went through and worked hard to change it. And 50 years later, has it been 50 years, I guess? It's changed. And I have people that worked for the Republican Party, and was 11 years the state chairman. That was their number one issue year after year.
It's been the number one wedge issue for every election.
And it will continue to be.
And it definitely is going to be this time, except the wedge has switched over to where I think that it is our democratic issue, and it's a people's issue, it's a family issue, and I think that this is going to make the difference. I like quantitative studies along with my qualitative studies, and your quantitative information, I think, upholds what I'm saying.
So I want to connect, Lou, with you were talking about with the surge of voter registration with actual turnout. Is there any data showing that those folks who do register are more likely to turn out to vote?
So that's a great question, Phil. And so far we are seeing that, right? Turnout for midterm elections, especially midterm primaries, tends to be some of the lowest turnout that we see, right? That is not the case right now. We have seen a surge, an upswing. But back to Rob's point, the expectation isn't that it's just going to be Democrats that turn out for these midterm elections. The turnout is probably going to be up on the Republican side as well. And again, this is what it always boils down to, right? in a deeply, highly polarized electorate, where there just isn't that much overlap between the two parties in terms of ticket splitting and the willingness to vote for the other party, even among the self-proclaimed independents, right, who are independent of party but almost always lean one direction in their voting choices. So, but I will tell you, there is not just in terms of the turnout, there's another thing to think about here. The 2020 election really hinged, the 2020 presidential election and the down ballot House of Representatives elections really turned on suburban Republican women. And like we said, there are very few voters that actually split their tickets these days, right? But we saw that, we have direct evidence of that in 2020, because we saw President Trump lose re-election handily, but we also saw in a year where a Democrat wins the presidency, we saw the Republicans in the House of Representatives pick up a net of 12 seats. And so there you have to think about those voters, and we political scientists think they were suburban Republican women predominantly in that election who said, I'm not signing up for 4 more years of President Trump, but I don't trust the Democrats to give them the keys to the purse, right? The power of the purse kind of thing.
We have a lot of split ticking voters here in Pennsylvania too, especially in the Pittsburgh suburbs. It is a very, very common thing that for example, in the North Hills here in Pittsburgh, just north of here, a lot of people voted for Biden really, and he did really well there, historically well. But everyone else on the down ballot, they were voting for Republicans, and that's why you saw not only do you see people in Congress pick up seats, but you saw in the row offices, you saw the Treasury flipped. An incumbent lost the treasurer seat here in Pennsylvania. Auditor General went to the Republicans as well, and so that's something that we really have to think about in Pennsylvania. A much higher percentage of split ticket voters, I think, than we see nationally. Even though the number is shrinking a lot, it's still a very common thing here. And I think what we're all, people who are really paying close attention to these races, we're all thinking that these races are going to be, I don't know, maybe blowout. Sometimes we see these polls and stuff. It's probably going to come down to 1 point. It's going to be really close. It's like when Senator Toomey won election and won re-election, he won by 1 to 2 points, and I think that's what we're going to see again this year. It's just a really tight race.
So since we have 2 former state party chairs here and we're talking about turnout, can each of you talk about what, based on your experience, what state party organizations are doing to get people to turn out?
Well, the Democratic Party, we've focused on voter registration. As we talked about, we were behind and one cycle, and it was sort of a wake-up call. So we've worked with college Democrats, maybe some here in this room, I don't know, to get college students registered and to increase registration. But more importantly, we've had a coordinated campaign, and the coordinated campaign has been in place through we didn't just put it in place. The coordinated campaign has been in place for over a year. And when I was the party chair up until June, half of my staff of 30 people moved over to the coordinated campaign. So we had experienced people from the state party move to coordinated. All candidates for the U.S. Congress, the governor, lieutenant governor, U.S. Senate, are all contributing to the coordinated campaign. I think it's going to make a big difference. Historically, what used to happen was people would coordinate in the year of the election, and it was always too late because you couldn't figure out exactly how to do that. You couldn't get those people, get the boots on the ground and knock doors. So I think that has made a big difference, and also not only voter registration, but voter protection. We've had that in place in Pennsylvania, the Democratic Party, since the last election. So I think that we learned a lesson whenever we lost some down ballot races in the Biden race, and that was brought up, and I think 90,000 people voted for Biden and then only voted for Biden. So that was really interesting. But that was at a time when the Democrats couldn't door knock. And, we are retail politicians. We like to door knock. So I think that we have the best candidates on the ballot, and I think we're in a better shape now than we were 2 years ago.
Well, I can only speak of 2016 when I was the chairman when Donald Trump got elected. And I had built up, and I can only speak when I was the chairman, that she can too. I can't speak now for what they're doing. But we focused on that election for 4, 5, 6 years, that presidential election that was coming. Started to build up, raise money so that we had the money to build up staff. I had a staff on 250 people through 2016. A lot of them were your age. They were young people. They were organizing precincts and counties, working very closely with the state house, the state senate, congressional. As the chairwoman said, we had a coordinated campaign. We really worked hard. Hillary Clinton was supposedly had a vaunted ground game in 2016, but we really had a real ground game. And working with the National Party was very important as well. So I knew the chairman pretty well. Ryan Deto was a good friend of mine, and if I was a little short of something, I could call him, and he would. Pennsylvania is always critical. But Pennsylvania has only gone once for the President of the United States in the past 36 years, and I was the chairman that year. So. And that was because we really had a tremendous ground game. And you don't, as the chairwoman said, you don't just do it in 1 year. You have to do it over a period of time. You build it up over years and years. It costs a lot of money. It's a big problem. I think this year, as far as Republicans are concerned, I'm not so sure how the ground game is this year. In even years and presidential years, everybody's looking at television. They're spending millions of dollars on television and hoping that the television will drive everybody out. But when Donald Trump only won by 45,000 votes, that's when the ground game paid off. So we squeezed 35,000 votes out of Philadelphia. Even though we lost it by 200,000, we squeezed 35,000 more. We picked up 5,000 votes here, 2 there, ended up winning. If it's a million runaway, it doesn't really matter. So as was said here, this could be close. The ground game could be very important. It's a matter of energizing people who want to work on the campaigns. Do you want to work for Dr. Oz? Do you want to work for Governor Fetterman? And you have to be motivated. You're probably not going to be motivated just because you're a Republican or a Democrat. Usually it's candidates that motivate people that want to do that. But as I mentioned earlier, I kind of dissed the candidates a little bit. I think the issues are so powerful in this election, whether it's the pro-life issue or the Dobbs thing or whether it's economics. I think the issues are so powerful this year, they will determine who's going to win the election, and the exit polls will show that. So when the people leave, they'll say, well, why did you vote this way and that way? And that's the way it's going to be. That's the way I see it.
Ryan, you wrote about the candidates' use of social media. And in one of your articles, you say Pennsylvania's political social media atmosphere has been odd, chaotic, and sometimes funny, but it's debatable how much of an impact it will have, all the social media posts will have. There has been a lot of lively social media activity, especially in the U.S. Senate race. What are you seeing there, and what impact do you think?
Yeah, first of all, it's night and day from 2016. I just want to say that too, in terms of the Senate races, which Fetterman was a candidate as well in the Democratic primary, which he didn't win, but. It's nuts. I don't know what else to say in terms of so many more voters or maybe observers are getting all of their stuff through social media. And so I think that's what they're determining the races are. But that's still just a fraction of the actual voters. Most of the stuff is going to be on TV ads. If you watch Wheel of Fortune, sometimes I have to wake up early and do a morning shift and I watch the TV news and it's just like pummeled with TV ads, and you get all these things. But that's who most of the voters are. Those are the most consistent voters in this state, people who are watching TV news, basically. But yeah, Fetterman he's got a natural talent in terms of the how to gauge social media and how to get earned media, how to get headlines, the New York Times and these other places from a tweet or from a cameo thing that he did with like Snooki from Jersey Shore. That's a skill, and that's really helped him early on in this race. Now, when you get closer to October and all these other things, he's going to have to debate. And also, he did actually, just breaking news sort of, but he did say he's going to debate.
Did he?
He did, yeah. They just broke like about an hour ago.
Okay.
But just one debate, I guess, which isn't that many. But so yeah, you're going to have to debate. You're going to have to really get your message straightened through mostly TV ads, probably, because again, that's where most of the voters are. But yeah, I mean, the social media really has been chaotic too. And like, I would say like Fetterman's really excelled, and then Mastriano's like on the opposite side, where he just keeps like flubbing, and he's doing weird stuff on social media that gets called out by the other side. And it's been fun, I guess, but maybe a little bit too much, because I don't think we want to pay attention to these campaigns for this long, but that's kind of what it's done. It's elongated the campaign.
And we can't take the blame or the credit anymore.
That's true.
Lou, from a point of view of a political scientist, you're looking at social media and looking at television ads. Is there an age difference there, or are there other types of differences in terms of who's reaching out to whom?
Well, there is an age difference, right? Younger people tend to be on more platforms more often. Johan Hari calls it switching and filtering. You think you are awesome multitaskers. You're not quite nearly as good as you think you are. Just letting you know that. Some of you will be hearing more of that during the semester, right? But anyway, the point is actually across the spectrum, right? People increasingly are getting their information, and often misinformation or disinformation, from social media platforms. And Ryan talked about how the Fetterman campaign and the candidate himself have a knack for being able to kind of time the pace and hit the right note and attract the clicks and the views and such. And we know who else is the master of that, right? The former president is the master of this, right? And we're in an entirely new information environment. There's no question about that. And these people, whether it's the former President Trump or it's candidate Fetterman, Lieutenant Governor Fetterman, the people who can master this, they are doing better than others because they are getting their message out on their terms. Another way of putting this is if you think about what my esteemed panel colleagues do as chairs of the respective parties, fundraising and organizing are probably the two biggest things that they do, right? And they are able to amass vast sums of money. So in these races, especially if you're talking about down ballot races or kind of the races that don't get the most attention, the candidates are trying to put out their own messages. Typically, they have to rely upon paid media to do that, far more than the attention they can get from free media. But they're being drowned out by all of the other voices, all of the other messages that are coming from independent expenditures since Citizens United, right, back in 2010. So not only is the message being kind of managed for a lot of these candidates, and their message is being dwarfed by this, but the last point I want to make on this is, how is it that former President Trump or Lieutenant Governor Fetterman are able to cut through the noise? It's by being provocative and ever more provocative. The same things that underpin the social media platforms' algorithms, right? The only way they get your attention is by ever increasing the level of provocation, the level of controversy. And so, unfortunately, that actually works with the electorate, right? Negative advertising works far better than positive advertising. So it actually puts us in kind of a dangerous place, right? And I think you're going to continue to see that get even more strident as we work our way through the fall.
Could you comment on the president's last speech, with the Marines and the red and everything? Why the networks didn't cover that? None of the three major networks covered, which was unusual for them not to cover a president's speech.
So I can't speak to what the networks were thinking on this. I will tell you, though, that all of these media are businesses, right? So they tend to, unless it is a noteworthy, where they believe that this is something of national import, and I think also potentially because they were burned to an extent during the Trump campaign in 2016, right, where as candidate Trump, he was able to realize some estimates put it at multiple billions of dollars of free media, because everything, every utterance, every speech, every rally was covered by the mainstream press. In this particular case, maybe some of those network platforms made the decision that they may have seen it as a political speech, and they were going to allow their other channels, their affiliated channels, to cover those things. But maybe they decided not to.
It was unusual.
It was also a college football kickoff day. Just
Yeah,
remember
Thursday
that
night.
too. Pitt,
Well, I know.
West Virginia backyard brawl.
Nobody watched it here. I know that.
Man, that was a great game.
But the major networks had reruns.
I'm glad they reran
Right,
that.
right. Yeah, but I mean, maybe they wouldn't want to compete with the ratings that would be elsewhere
Well,
because
locally
college
they
football.
might,
Yeah,
yeah.
I thought it was
Crazy,
confusing
yeah.
too, but.
Nancy, I want to ask you about television ad strategies. At this point in a campaign, as we're going into the general election, what types of strategies do campaigns tend to use around this time?
Well, I think that first of all, the ads are already made. The ads are done, and the messages, they'll be putting out positive messages, then they'll put negative messages out, then they'll go back to positive. So we know how the trend is. I think that with vote by mail really changed everything. We haven't brought that up. People will start voting here pretty soon. So all the ads and all the money in the world is not going to elect someone in late October. So this election could be over in September. So what we're seeing now and what we're seeing on the airwaves now can determine, if we talk about 9 weeks left in the election, not really, because I think that the next 4 weeks are when you're really going to see the push to make sure that people get the message before they vote by mail. College students vote by mail, Democrats vote by mail. And I think that was an opportunity that was lost by the Republicans. It was their act, Act 77, and that they wanted vote by mail. We gave up straight ballot voting in exchange for vote by mail, and then the Republicans didn't utilize it. So that made a huge difference the first year, and I think it did the second year. This year, I think vote by mail is going to be increasingly strong. People now are automatically voting that way rather than going to the polls. The ads themselves, to get back to that, I don't like negative ads any more than anybody else does, but they work, and they've been proven to work, and they're going to continue to use them. Wouldn't you love it if we could just see candidates talk about the issues once again, just talk about the issues without slurring each other and without lying. There's a lot of lying in ads. And of course, as a party leader, I know you hate that too, and we cringe whenever any one of our candidates that we have been bragging about does something as devastating as a bad ad. We saw that in the primary. There were some bad ads in the Democratic primary, and they hurt one of our candidates. I think that the ads are in the can. They're ready to go. The Republican ads and the millions of dollars that they have put in from the RNC are starting to fall. I saw that Mehmet Oz's ad was far more positive than some of the messages that he's had in the past. I'll be interested to see how Fetterman's ads evolve and change, and I am very happy to hear that he's going to debate, because I know that he is capable and healthy and feeling great, and I look forward to that too.
Rob, let's talk about the importance of debates. It's a topic that's come up a little bit here occasionally for the night. How much do debates really illuminate the issues? We talk about how the candidates don't often talk about the issues. Do debates give voters real insight into the issues?
I don't think they do on a statewide basis. I think nationally they do. And if we remember looking at some of the past national elections, it's when somebody made a mistake or a gaffe or they didn't do well in the national debate, More and more people are watching local debates. I don't think people would rather watch a football game or something than watch gubernatorial candidates or Senate candidates. So I don't think debates more help the media because they can be there, they can ask questions and try to ferret out some of the issues, and then they write about them, and then they'll put them on the internet. But the actual people, the number of people who watch debates, it's really not important. So the fact that Fetterman wouldn't debate, see, that was an issue then for Oz. So he just keep beating on him and said, come on, you got to debate, you got to debate. And now Fetterman said he's going to debate because he had to. The reason that these decisions are made, Fetterman, I don't know what he did, but here's what I think he did. They do polls every night, and they do focus groups. They get a group like you in here, and they'd ask you, what do you think? Is it important for me to debate, or can I skip it? And obviously, the numbers said, you better get out there and debate. Okay, This is a negative to you. So I think, presidents and people running for office, they're well informed before they make decisions. They're polling all the time. They're doing focus groups before they make a lot of these decisions. If they make some dumb decision or they say something that they shouldn't have said, that means they didn't listen to the polls and to their advisors on doing that type of thing. Right, so right. I don't think they're that important in the statewide.
Lou?
I would just totally agree with that. That I think polls are just for us nerds who love, all the politics and every little thing that comes out of it, and especially for the media too. I was like, oh yeah, we finally get to get that answer we always wanted. And I've been covering politics for a few years now, and voters don't watch polls. Like it's just us nerds and maybe some other nerds on Twitter that will also be like, hey, did you see that? And I'm like, yeah. But so, yeah, and it's just the issue of not debating, right? So if you don't debate, then you're just, what are you hiding? What are you doing? All this stuff. So Fetterman has to debate. He's not a good debater, though. I mean, he wasn't good in the primary, and now he has some speech issues with the recovering from the stroke. It's not going to be easy, but he does. I agree with Rob that he does have to do it just to stop that answer.
And Mastriano's going to have to too, and he has been avoiding it as well, and he's going to have to debate as well. It's just something that's very important. And I think all these candidates, whether it's Mastriano or Fetterman, they have to talk to the media. They just have to. You don't have to like them. You could call it fake news. You can do anything you want to. If you remember, President Trump talked all the time to the media, all the time. He's getting in the helicopter, you're yelling back and forth. I mean, that's what he did.
We can never
that's
forget
what
that.
He did. But that's, he was really, you can like him or not like him, but he certainly was open. We all knew where he stood at all times. And then we were talking before, I can't remember a candidate, I've been in politics many years, who after he lost, 18 months later, he drew 18,000 people to a rally in northeastern Pennsylvania. That's just unbelievable that he still has a lot of followers. I don't know anybody in the United States that could put out a thing and say, I'm going to have a meeting, I want you to come, could draw 18,000 people.
The Grateful Dead.
They maybe could.
They could do it.
Are they on the
You're
ballot?
right about
Are they on the ballot?
I agree. Rock groups, but not politicians. And you know what? The other people can, like some preachers can draw a lot of people too as well.
Right.
Lou, I wanted to ask you about some of the terms that we use to describe people's political positions. We often talk about moderates and centrists. What do those terms mean in today's political environment?
Okay, if you're in the Republican Party, that means you're a rhino. If you are a moderate, right? A Republican in name only. And so Nancy and I were chatting beforehand about a couple of things, and I was chatting with Rob as well about others. But one of the things I was talking about to Nancy, as the former chair of the Pennsylvania Democratic Party, is that one difference I see between the two parties in this election cycle is that I think the Democrats are doing a much better job than the Republicans in terms of being able to bring together the wings and the different interests within their party. And in the Democratic Party, that the kind of the shorthand for that are the progressives and the liberals on the further left on the ideological spectrum, and then the centrists or the moderates who are in the middle. I mean, think about it this way. In Pennsylvania, we really didn't have competitive primaries either for the gubernatorial race or for the Senate race, right? For the Senate nomination. The party really gravitated to two candidates, got behind those two candidates, and began to save a lot of money to be able to spend not only in defining who their candidates were during the springtime, but have that war chest then that's available for the fall. Quite different on the Republican side this time. And again, this is a question of whether or not the Republican Party is tolerant of dissent within its ranks these days. And again, I'm not speaking as a partisan, I'm speaking as a scientist here. So it will be really interesting to me as a scientist watching this and as a citizen as we come through this cycle, and if those polls that only nerds pay attention to are in fact accurate, and they can change quite a bit. We know that they have not been entirely reliable over the last several election cycles, right? But if they do hold up, and I'm like Nancy and Rob, I think these races are both going to tighten. They always do in Pennsylvania. They're going to tighten as we push towards November. But if the Democratic, if Shapiro and Fetterman do emerge victorious in the fall, it's going to be very interesting to watch what conclusions the Republican Party in Pennsylvania draws from those outcomes. Because, I've known Dave McCormick for a long time. He's a year behind me at West Point, and I watched what I thought was going to be McCormick as a Toomey-style Republican emerge from that with the goal of winning that race. Shows you what a quality of political scientist I am, right? Because similarly on the Democratic side, Connor Lamb was the darling of the Democrats nationally back in 2018, right? He never got traction, right? And all it took, I think, was former President Trump's endorsement of Oz just to get him over the hump. And then, of course, you had Kathy Barnett, who we're not quite sure who she was siphoning votes off, but she took about a quarter of the vote in that race, right? So the point is that if it does play out the way that we would think it would, where we sit here today, and again, 9 weeks from now, we might have an entirely different view of how this might play out. I think the Republicans are going to have to think about how far to the right their candidates should be in order for them to be competitive in the general elections. Even going back to 2020 and Georgia, for example, right? If you lose enough elections, you have to do a reckoning. The last time the Republicans did a reckoning, their party analysts actually said we have to make this a broader tent, a bigger tent. That's not the direction the party went. They doubled down on the further right ideology, right? It's their party. They can decide to do whatever they want. But ultimately, if you lose those elections, especially in a year that really should favor the Republicans, then they're going to have to do some reckoning and think about how they're going to navigate what has become a party, with all respect, that does not tolerate dissent within its ranks, right? And if you are not a true believer on the further part of the right end of the spectrum, then you don't have a home in that party right now.
And I'd like to comment on that as the
you do,
chairperson.
Rob. Yeah.
Well, you're absolutely right. The Republican Party made a huge mistake not endorsing. When I was the state chairman, we always endorsed. The state committee comes together, 360 people, and we voted to endorse, and then we endorse a candidate and go out and work for them. In 11 years, I only lost 3 elections of candidates that we endorsed candidates always won because we had the money, we had the people behind them. For whatever the reason, I can't comment on the chairman that's there now. That's his business. They didn't endorse. They should have endorsed. And even though maybe a couple of these people would have run anyway, they would have lost. And we would have had better candidates. So I agree with you 100%.
So we only have a few minutes left, so I want to give each one of you an opportunity to just tell us what types of things should voters be paying attention to over the next couple of months. Nancy?
Well, I think that we're reflecting on what you had said about how the people voted. They voted in the primary for people that they knew the best. They knew John Fetterman better than they knew Connor Lamb. The insiders, political insiders, maybe knew Connor Lamb better than they knew Fetterman, but that was not what the voters saw. The voters knew Mastriano better than the opponent, and I know that you had supported someone else, and I understand that. I think that Dr. Oz beat McCormick because he was better known. So whenever you're in a primary race, the voters actually come out and vote for the people that they know. Well, now we have an opportunity to get to know everyone. We have from May to, I think, late October to get to know the candidates. I think that whenever a candidate presents themselves to the voters and they can relate to the candidate, they don't see an elitist, they see someone that's like them, they see someone that they can relate to and on every level, economically, socially. I think that makes a big difference. I think that's where Fetterman certainly has appeal. As a Democrat leader, I've had very few Republicans come up to me over the past 10, 20 years and tell me that they were going to vote for one of my candidates. So my Republican friends are never going to tell me that they're going to vote for one of my people. And I have had 3 people from the broadest spectrum in Pennsylvania to come to me and say, you know who I really like? I like Fetterman. I think that people are going to vote for the person that they like, and the issues are going to be important, but I think right now we are into a personality election.
Ryan?
I think the Republicans, we're just going to keep working on the issues. Things couldn't get any worse. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? Spending more for gas, spending more at the stores for inflation, crime, you're afraid to go downtown. I mean, I go a lot of times to Philadelphia. I've avoided trips there because I'm afraid. A city run by Democrats, Pittsburgh's run by Democrats, New York is, Chicago. The border's a huge problem. Millions of people have come into our country, walked across. They're taking the places, jobs away from our people, causing a lot of cost to our governments to take care of them. The governor of Florida is bussing them around because why should he be taking care of them? So these are huge issues, and I think the people are going to be looking at these issues and saying this has to stop. And at the end of the day, the cause and effect of this comes from the federal government, and I think at the end of the day, we're just going to talk about issues and say vote Republican. We can stop the border, we can close things up, we can reduce prices, we can reduce the price of gas, we can get out of wars. Think about this. We're in 4 wars right now. We are warring with Russia. Don't say that Ukraine. We are warring with Russia. We're sending $50 billion to Ukraine recently and no accountability. We're at war with China. We're at war with North Korea. We are at war right now, and we were not at war the 4 years that Donald Trump was the president. And you young men in here, you've all registered for the draft, I think. You know, the Army's having a hard time getting people. And I could see the draft coming up one of these days soon because they're going to need, if McDonald's needs people, you know the U.S. Army needs people.
Ryan, final thought?
The thing that I'm probably going to be watching the most is just how effective this carpetbagging attack is and whether or not, I feel like it's really effective because Pennsylvanians are just so parochial and I'm from this neighborhood and I'm from, I'm from California originally and it gets brought up all the time. You're like, oh, you're not from here? It's like, no. But so it's just one of those things. So I'm going to be really interested to see. I know that Fetterman's going to keep hitting that. I'm going to be really interested to see how that plays out and how that affects this race because that could basically kind of be a warning sign to any other, candidate that isn't born and raised here to maybe stay away from Pennsylvania if you want to run. That might work in Nevada or even in California, my home state, because we have a lot of transplant there. But I'm, that's really what I want to.
But
see.
He really doesn't live in Pennsylvania, though. He lives everywhere but Pennsylvania.
Which only makes the attack.
We're almost out of time. Lou, 30 seconds. Give us a final thought.
Okay, first off, thank you very much to our distinguished panelists for visiting us here at Duquesne University today. It's a great day for us to have these esteemed colleagues join us. I'm going to give a quick thought here. One is the number of competitive districts in the U.S. House of Representatives has shrunk down to 32 seats across the United States. Go back a couple of years, that was 40 seats. Go a couple years before that, it was about 45 seats. So this means that the toughest races in the country are those primaries, and that tends to polarize people and push them apart, which leads to my closing point as a citizen. I'm concerned about the peaceful transition of authority, political authority. I'm going to be watching in the fall to see whether or not we have we revisit some of the problems that we had in 2020, and I sincerely hope that we do not. Well, our guests have been Ryan Deto, a reporter with the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review,
Rob Gleason, former GOP chair for Pennsylvania, Nancy Patton Mills, former Democratic Party chair in Pennsylvania, and Louis Irwin, our political science professor and host here at Duquesne University. Thank you all for joining us. That's it for our show for this evening. Stay with PCN for further coverage of the Pennsylvania 2022 general election. Thank you. I'm Phil Beckman.